Aloha Hawaii, this is Poka Lainui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. Our telephone number here is 524-1080 in the event you would like to call and join us on the radio. And I do have a caller already calling, so let's go to our morning caller. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Hi, Polka.
Yes, hi.
Listen, I just tuned in, so I'm not sure exactly where you're at, but I remember last night, and I have an idea.
Okay.
We got to make a deal with the devil. Here's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We tell right wingers we know that that Obama was not born in the United States of America. Okay, and then we'll say, okay, but the deal is you got to come along with us and state that he was born in the nation of Hawaii,
Mm-hmm.
and that there was an overthrow in 1893, and that you need to denounce the whole idea of Hawaii being part of the United States of America,
Uh-huh.
and then we will take him and then we'll prove certain that he was not born in the United States of America. Then
And move from there.
yeah, then move from there. and then they have to come out and say, he is, and this is a country that this was a foreign country, and then they have then we show that document, the apology to the people of Hawaii from 1993, where the Congress and Clinton admitted that this place was overthrown and taken over, and then
Okay. I get your point.
yeah. Well, then all the other things about them being born in Kenya and all this kind of stuff, and being a CIA agent or whatever, can go down the drain. But see, they will not do that because they will want military and power and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
so, anyway, I mean, the absurdity of all this is so stupid. You might as well take advantage of, try and get them on all grounds, Anyway, we'll see if that stirs up anything.
It will stir up a lot of things, but I think you have a good point. To answer. Yeah.
I mean, it would be wonderful if the publicity could get out there. Oh yeah, God, look at this. They were. This was an illegal overthrow.
Yes.
Just like they're saying that Obama's an illegal. I guess what would you call him? An illegal alien.
He's a product of an illegal act. Yeah, that's good.
Right. And then take a discussion from there.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Take care. Aloha. And to follow up on what David had just proposed, let me suggest that what is the word for it? The conflict. It's not really a conflict. It's right now I'm missing the appropriate term for it. But on one hand, you have the facts. I'm sorry, I should put it this way. You have reality in fact. The reality in fact is that Obama was born in Hawaii. Okay. So there's no question about it, and these birthers, as far as I'm concerned, are essentially nuts to suggest or to misdirect their attack against Obama based on who the father is or who the parent is, and all of these arguments. They're essentially trying to get at the fact that because he's half black, that he shouldn't be president, and trying to find one way or another way of doing it. There are others who just don't like his being president, not necessarily because of his color, but may have disagreements about his policies. But in terms of the place of his birth, the fact is that he was born in Hawaii. The reality by agreement is really what should be contested. The reality by agreement is that Hawaii is part of the United States by those who have been able to sort of carry the day, not necessarily by argumentation or logic, but by force of arms. The reality by agreement is that because Hawaii is part of the United States, then they can reach a conclusion that Obama was born in the United States. But that is merely reality by agreement, which needs to be questioned over and over and over again. The fact is that the legitimate transfer of Hawaii to the United States has never occurred. There has been no legitimacy in that transfer. The people of Hawaii has never been given an opportunity to concede to such a transfer. And at this time, I won't go into all of the details of why that has been the case, but that has been the case. So I think David raises a very interesting, complex question, not very complex, but essentially the reality, in fact, is that he was indeed born in Hawaii. As long as you continue to push that the reality by agreement is that Hawaii is part of the United States, then not only are you wrong, but you face a consequence of having to accept Barack Obama as your president. Okay, what about others who still want him as president but also support Hawaii as an independent nation? We can continue with that argument that the reality, in fact, is Hawaii is not part of the United States. The reality, and it should be a reality by agreement because of the illegalities that have occurred. I don't think the smaller number of us who feel that way will persuade the vast numbers in the United States, at least in the next 4 years, that he should not be its president. Okay? Our telephone number here is 524-1080. If you would like to call me at that number, and we'll put you on the radio. Let's go to our next caller. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Pope.
Good morning.
I haven't anything to contribute except to congratulate Dave for thinking outside of the box. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think you could checkmate the Republicans on that. You know, if they want to say he wasn't born in the United States, then just say Hawaii's not part of the United States. See if you can get the agreement on that one. You know where that's going to stop them. I think it's a great idea. Congratulations, Dave.
Thank you for your call. Take care. Aloha. All right. So, David, you can lead our parade on that one. And I joined in the last caller's congratulations to you for that brilliant idea. Okay, the next item that I wanted to talk about dealt with the subject of veterans and post-traumatic syndrome disorder, PTSD. I do not deny the validity of such disorders among certain people, among certain veterans, but they are not only limited to war veterans. PTSD can hit many, many people who have suffered from traumatic experiences, witnessing the death of a loved one or the battering of a spouse or many other traumatic incidents, or even, I guess, seeing a movie that so terribly scares you and you suffer from it even after or many years after that, and you have certain things that you recall and that brings back these memories. These are all part of that post-traumatic stress disorders. Okay. So I do not deny the existence of it, but when you deal with American war veterans in the Vietnam War, in the Afghanistan War, in the war against the Iraqis and Iraq, those disorders, I think, are, or the PTSD is being used as, how should I say it, to a certain extent as a scapegoat for another aspect of a disorder that should be addressed. And as long as you don't fully address it, but you address it only as PTSD, then you're not providing the necessary needs of the American veterans. What do I mean by that statement? While, as I said before, I admit that it is a legitimate disorder, and far more disorders exist than the Veterans Administration had previously been willing to admit to. There are other things that also becomes disorders as a result of these wars, and they are not being addressed by the Veterans Administration. And those disorders are the disorder as a result of shame, disorders as a result of guilt for the activities that have been committed, disorders as a result of the sense that they had committed violations against humanity in their participation of these wars. These kinds of things that continue to rest on the souls and the consciousness of these veterans are disorders that are not being appropriately addressed by the Veterans Administration. And why not? Because to address those disorders is to come face to face with the fact that the United States has been, in essence, the criminals, the culprits, the violators of international law, the creators of great inhumanities against these victims. And they have perpetuated these kinds of activities that many of the people who have come back as a result of participation in those wars continue to suffer. It's not necessarily PTSD that they're suffering from, but it's that shame, that guilt, that need to be able to express these regrets, but there are not enough functions or not enough ceremonies or not enough opportunities to express it. And because it is that sense of shame and that sense of guilt, that it's not being brought out in the public, so people are not saying as loudly as they should be saying these things. Now, I just recently saw an event that occurred, where was that? In Chicago, was it? Not too long ago, where military servicemen, having been given medals by NATO, conducted a ceremony. They went before the public and they announced, each one of them, why they were tossing those medals away, and did so publicly because of that shame, because of that embarrassment. The opportunity to apologize for having participated in these wars that the United States had told them was appropriate, was sort of patriotic. And as they spoke, as they cried, as they tossed their medals back at in the direction of where NATO was meeting, saying that I am returning, I am tossing away the commendations that we received, or I received, back at NATO. There's not enough of that, and I think that needs to be done to clear up a lot of the issues that these veterans are facing. Our telephone number here is 524-1080. We have a caller. The caller has just left, so we won't be taking that call. But if you would like to call and you have any views on this particular issue, give me a call at 524-1080. When I ask for or invite your telephone calls, I am not necessarily saying that I only will take calls that are in agreement with my position, but I am casting my position out, and I am allowing you, irrespective of what your particular views are with regards to that position, giving you an opportunity to state such views. Okay, telephone number 524-1080. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning, Polka. How are you
this morning?
Fine.
Good.
Listen, your your discussion on the post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yes.
And looking at what is not being addressed is a very important to get a broader view of the negative reactions people have when they come back from the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and other wars. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to add a little bit of information that you might find interesting as well as your listeners.
Okay.
And that has to do with how post-traumatic stress seems to reoccur intergenerationally, over generations.
Yes.
With certain groups of people who have experienced very serious violence on them in the form of like genocidal practices. And in the United States, the history with Native Americans is one such practice, a genocide, military interventions.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're characterized by just horrific suffering and death that was observed by the survivors of the tribes. I say that because there are some difficult behaviors to explain in psychology with people who come from groups that are have experienced this sort of trauma in the past. For instance, Native American Indians have this very high rate of domestic violence and substance abuse. And the psychological theories that are Western don't seem to explain why they're carried over generation to generation. And what's interesting, and I'll kind of make this short, is that British researchers in genetics have been able to identify that when someone sees a horrific event, that their body goes through a genetic mutation. There's a reaction on a biological level. And that this biological reaction results in it being carried over when the sperm and egg meet to the future generation of children. And so what you might find interesting is that there is seems to be, and I think they're going to find more evidence, a biological basis for the ill treatment and horrific treatment people experience. And I would classify Native Hawaiians as this group who went through just a genocidal phenomena in the 1800s that is carried over biologically. That Native American Indians have referred to this intergenerational post-traumatic stress as a soul wound.
As a what? As a soul?
A soul, S-O-U-L, a soul wound.
Wow, I see, okay.
And it's something that the spirit has inherited as a result of being subjected to just traumatic stress. But now we're finding that it is grounded also in biology. And I know you have talked about thought field therapy before, and interestingly, that form of therapy of tapping seems to address some of these biological changes that are going on. And so I'm just saying this as information to kind of expand your important discussion of post-traumatic stress from a cultural oppression perspective.
Now, before you go, it appears that you would be someone who has dealt with these types of traumas using one and using another technique, using more psychoanalysis technique of talking about it, trying to process it out, and then trying to deal with the trauma and trying to resolve the after effects of the trauma based on that technique. And there's this other technique of just dealing with the tapping with the meridians and trying to at least depress the distress level and working it through that direction. Can you tell me how you see, based on your experience, one or another technique and what can be done, one, to address these issues, and then secondly, how do we, I guess it's a, what is that, a question that doesn't really need an answer. How do we avoid having committing such actions to prevent these events from occurring again?
Well, points. One, I am a mental health professional and a practitioner, and I have worked with persons who have experienced traumatic events resulting in post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And they have included veterans, adolescents subjected to violence in their families, partners, spousal partners who have experienced domestic violence, etc. And having attended professional conferences, my experience in the past is shared by other practitioners. And when we use traditional Western psychological theories in our practices with post-traumatic stress, we are fundamentally trying to have the client revisit the traumatic experience so that they can remove the psychological denial that oftentimes goes as a coping mechanism. You try to repress the memories of the past.
Yes.
And so there's an effort to increase and discuss the actual traumatic event and to help the client develop new insights into their reactions to these events through a catharsis, an emotional release of their recollection. The problem with that, and it's shared by other mental health practitioners that I consult with and discuss this matter with, is that it seems to unintentionally make it worse. That there is the ability of mental health professionals to help clients recall past horrific events. And the client does go through an emotional release, but the release seems to make their memories and their reactions worse instead of relieving it. So there seems to be something missing that psychologists and counselors are not able to add to help move beyond these emotional issues. And what I have found in just the past 2 years of studying thought field therapy is that you do not have to get into a lengthy discussion of events that continue to revive very negative emotional reactions. You don't have to discuss that. You can, you talk to a client and you're able to say, you know, what's going on that brought you here today for counseling. A client would say something like, you know, I'm just having a lot of stress in my life. I can't sleep. I'm having trouble with eating. How long has this gone on? What's going on since I came back from the Iraq War? Okay, let's try a tapping method that is designed to help address this stress and problems with sleeping. And then we would do a tapping protocol, it's called.
Yes.
And what I have found is that there is both short-term alleviation, a solution to the problems, and the clients express, I feel less stress, and over 2 weeks later, my sleep is getting better, and my eating habits are getting better. And I also note that it seems to be lasting effect if the client continues to use these tapping methods on a daily basis. So that's my experience there. Now, to answer your second question, given what we know about post-traumatic stress, some persons in the field of psychology and counseling have tried to redefine this and redefine it by saying post-traumatic stress is actually a normal reaction to a very abnormal environmental situation. And psychologists are clear that war in and of itself is the sort of abnormal, unnatural, inhumane phenomena that causes people to have a common reaction that's normal to this abnormal situation. So having this knowledge, I would encourage and I wish that mental health professionals would simply be more honest in their professional work, and knowing what they know about post-traumatic stress and the issues of shame that you brought up that underlie what the veterans are experiencing, that associations like the American Psychological Association, the American Counseling Association would take a firm stand in having position statements that are focusing in on the need for peace and the eradication of war. And this is not only a political statement, but it's a professional psychological statement. And it's disconcerting to see the sort of conformity that mental health professionals have, and the denial or the lack of moral courage to simply say, we have to find other ways to resolve conflicts between nations, between individuals, than resorting to violence. But that's kind of a long answer to your question.
I think it hits it right on its head. There's these ideas of the struggle for peace and avoidance of war at almost all cost needs to be expressed, and it's not only a political statement, but for the purposes of mental health, it's absolutely necessary. There's another point that you raise, and you call it the soul wound, and how it expresses itself eventually in biology. I was thinking about this idea, the need to apologize, the need to overcome one's shame, the need for confession and for apology, and hopefully for acceptance of the apology by the other party. Normally, what the law says is that after your statute of limitation, if you have committed a crime at one instance, and the statute of limitation have run, then you are free from being prosecuted for it. So it seems like, well, you are now free, you can go ahead with life as if, as far as the society is concerned, it never happened, because it will not go after you after that. Sometimes the statute of limitation, there is none. So you can only hope for death to relieve your soul of this evil or this sin or whatever you have committed that you feel very badly about. But I'm not convinced that even death will release the soul, because the memory within its spirit of what had been done is carried forth, and oftentimes children who come from a particular culture feels that they need to repay for the debts, the sins, the evil of their parents. So some people find it residing within biology, residing within the genes, within the change in the gene structure. Other people may simply say, well, it's just a matter of spirit. The spirit is still not at rest. Other people will say, well, after death, as long as I go to heaven, the heck with it. I don't have to worry about anything else.
Well, I think your first 2 points should be taken together as possibilities, that there's an interaction between a soul and spirit reaction to someone who does horrific violence, and there's a biological reaction. I don't think we should kind of promote an either-or thinking, and I don't hear you doing that. It's a both and. One of the things that we might consider as people who live in Hawaii is the models of South Africa. Australia has done it, Kosovo has done it, and it's called the process of reconciliation. And these reconciliation processes are public gatherings in somewhat of a courtroom type atmosphere, only people are not, as they talk about the shame of their actions, there are not the statutes of limitations kind of is implemented so people are not arrested or go to jail for acknowledging publicly the horrors they committed. And psychologists have published articles on reconciliation as a therapeutic process, that people are able to not only express their shame in tearful and very, emotional ways, but they're also able to ask the families, what can they do to help make up for this? On a smaller scale, this group called Alcoholics Anonymous seems to have one of the 10 or 12 principles, I forget.
Yes, 10 steps, I think they call it.
Oh, yes, yeah, and so they encourage the alcoholics, which I think is a reaction that I think alcoholism is often a reaction to post-traumatic stress, to make peace and reconcile and to acknowledge one's shame and guilt for bad treatment they have done to others. The last point I would make is that I did see the broadcast on Democracy Now! It's a broadcast of alternative news on the Chicago events with veterans throwing back their medals and acknowledging their shame for what they had done in tearful ways. That was a couple weeks ago at the NATO meeting. And as I was observing that, I was perhaps projecting my own thoughts, but I did get a sense that there was some therapeutic outcome in doing that by articulating their shame. So I had put the link on a major listserv that I belong to, and with psychologists and counselors. That's an international listserv. And I had said, today is Memorial Day, and like others, I'm reflecting on the sacrifices and pain that our veterans have experienced, as well as what they have done to other people. And certainly being a member of the armed forces puts someone in a vulnerable position. That means tremendous sacrifice. But I would direct the members of this listserv to look at this hour-long news broadcast on what veterans are doing to address their guilt for what had gone on, because I think it's relevant for psychologists and counselors from a therapeutic point of view. Well, in about an hour, I had gotten 12 emails that were just totally negative, saying, why are you pushing your political agenda on this day? Another person said, my son had gone to war and was injured, and you have no respect for what has happened to him. And the others were even more intensely negative. And I think it says something to your beginning statement, Polka, which is, why aren't people addressing the shame and guilt? And I think it's a defense mechanism that other people, they just can't handle this psychologically. But I've taken up too much of your time. I appreciate the opportunity to expand the conversation in this way.
Thank you for your call, and you've been very informative. We'll talk again.
Have a nice day.
Take care. Aloha. And let me remind you that this is Polka Lai Nui, and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. I think it's important that we open this discussion, although it may seem like a wound that is being reopened, but in order to really cure the underlying issues below the surface of the wound, we need to reopen it and do this examination.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii, Kupa'a mahope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Pala pala anunu me ka paka. Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, Koku ana honoa o Pilani, Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano, Pa'apu me ke one o ka puhi hewa. Aolea e kau I ka pulima, Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi, Ho'ohui ai nā ku ai hewa, I ka pono sivila a